everyone in the online space talk about passive income, and that sounds amazing. But the passive part usually comes after you've put in all the work up front. And a lot of people don't see that because, of course, no one wants to tell you that part.
Get ready to build, protect, and sell your expertise online with the Online Genius Podcast. You'll laugh. We hope you won't cry. But you'll always be informed and prepared so you can have the success you want. Here's your host, Bobby Klink.
Hey everybody, welcome to this week's episode of the Online Genius Podcast. I'm your host, Bobby Klink, and look, I'm excited for today's show because it is unbelievably timely for my life. We're going to be talking about something that way too many online entrepreneurs ignore, and that's finding a way to design your business and your lifestyle to work together. And I say it's something that is timely for me because I'm in the middle of a big launch right now. Yesterday was my birthday. My wife and my brother are out in my house preparing for my birthday party tomorrow. And of course, I'm working. So it's something that I think we all need to be working on. And so I think it's a topic that is very timely. And today we're actually joined not by one guest, but by two, a husband and wife dynamic duo named Tom and Ariana Sylvester. Now, Tom is a serial entrepreneur, husband, father, and occasional Call of Duty player. Ariana is the accidental entrepreneur, wife, mother, and child lover. Now, they're college sweethearts and now business partners. And what's amazing is they actually have three very different businesses that they handle together. They run a real estate business, a wine and liquor store, and a coaching and training business for entrepreneurs. But they're also at the same time raising two energetic youngsters. And I'll tell you, in scheduling this interview, of course, we had to find a time before they were going to pick their youngsters up from the school bus. So they believe in integrating life and business and focus on helping entrepreneurs build their ideal lifestyle. Welcome to the show, Tom and Ariana.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for having us.
Now, look, I'm excited to talk about kind of this topic because it's something we definitely all need to be thinking about, and I definitely do. But I always like to get to know my guests a little bit before we start. And so in preparing for the interview, you guys mentioned that Tom loves survival shows, and I wasn't exactly sure what that means. So, Tom, you got to tell me, what shows are we talking about, and what is it about survival shows you like so much?
Sorry, I didn't warn him about that at all.
You don't warn me about most things, so that's okay. So my favorite show is Dual Survival. And I think a lot of that actually comes from the fact that I grew up like in this rural town, like literally our house was like in the middle of the woods. And what we did when we were growing up was just, we'd go out there, we'd climb, we'd like try to make fire, we'd like build forts, like we spend most of our days in front of a computer and in front of technology. So I think it's just cool to like get out into nature and be able to kind of shut all that stuff off. So I live vicariously through these survival shows.
So let me get this straight. It's cool to get away from your computer, but instead you just watch TV and pretend you're doing what these other people are doing.
Touche.
What he doesn't tell you is this is also his mode of falling asleep. This guy will take naps like it's his job, and that's what he likes to fall asleep to, is the survival shows. So maybe he's like dreaming about being out in the woods while he's sleeping.
Taking naps is another thing I want to talk to you about someday, Tom, because yesterday I really could have used one, but I am not a napper. I just can't do it.
Well, I felt, that we lost that when we left kindergarten, and I wanted to bring it back.
I agree, but I have a 4.5-year-old, and she doesn't like going to school, not because she doesn't like school, but because they make her take a nap. And so I can relate. I wish I could. So I love that about you. But Ariana, I love that you actually have a college degree that's directly related to what you do, right?
Well, not really.
Absolutely.
So what is your degree in? And tell us the story of how you got from there to what you're doing now.
I have a degree in zoology. Yeah, there is such a thing as that. It's working with animals in any sense, pretty much, except for being a veterinarian. I didn't want to be a veterinarian. But I did what everyone tells you to do in high school, and that's follow your passion. And I was passionate. I loved animals. So I said, I'm going to go get a degree in zoology. What I didn't realize until about maybe midway through senior year, when I had a little bit of a meltdown, was there's not that many jobs that you can get as a zoologist. So I ended up working. I did work with animals for a short time in my first real job, which was at a animal shelter. And then I ended up having an injury due to the heavy labor of the work and worked in an office for about a year or two. Then I worked in another office, and then I became a paralegal and all sorts of crazy stuff. I just kind of bounced around as an admin assistant until Tom got super motivated about businesses, and I became the manager for all of the businesses that we started and ran together.
And by the way, I love your mix of businesses, because clearly a wine and liquor store has a lot to do with coaching entrepreneurs.
Oh, totally.
It does.
Because you can actually drink your stock to make yourself feel better. Is that why? Or
Well, that's where all the really creative ideas come out.
I love that concept. Now, I think we could chat about these kind of things forever, but I do want to dive into the subject and the reason why we're here. And that's to kind of talk about designing your life and your business so that they work together. And as I alluded to, I mean, I have done this horribly wrong. For the last 3 weeks or so, I've been at my computer at about 6 a.m. and at my computer until about 8 or 9 at night. And I'm doing a launch, my birthday week, and all of these different things. So I'm doing it wrong. But how can entrepreneurs do it right? I mean, what's involved, and how do you start that process if you actually want to build the lifestyle you want, where you integrate your life and your work in a meaningful way?
Well, I'm going to first off stop you because you're not technically doing it wrong. What we want people to look at is everyone talks about balance in this space, right? They talk about work-life balance. That's not really a thing when you become an entrepreneur, because you're leaving the workspace and not a traditional 9 to 5 to give yourself more freedom. But as entrepreneurs, we know that often the most work comes upfront when you're building your business. And then along the way, you have different things happening at different times throughout the year. So right now you said that word, that launch. Obviously, you are going to be doing more and spending more time on your work during a launch. But the way that we like to tell people is if you can integrate your business and life together well, that means that you're not going to be working from 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. on your computer every day for the next 2 months. Hopefully, you're only doing that for a week or 2 weeks while you're in this big launch. And then you're going to take some time back for you and for your family after this really busy time in your business is done. So we talk about that integration being knowing that not everything is going to be in balance all the time, but being very intentional with how you are spending that time during those different moments of need. So, a lot of people talk about life happening and things in their business don't go the way they expected because life happens. There's a moment of you need to be intentional and spend more time in your life and be okay with the fact that your business is getting bumped down the priority list.
I love the way you express that, because I think a lot of entrepreneurs say that. And I said it tongue in cheek because I know, I know the concept of seasons, and there are going to be busy seasons. And one of the things I pride myself on, until literally my daughter had to go unexpectedly to the doctor this week. But until this, I had never missed a doctor's appointment for my daughter in her entire life. And I know that's only possible because I work for myself. I'm an entrepreneur, and, so I'm kind of the boss, and the boss gets to decide these things. But as someone is starting to do this, is there a process that they can go down to really start to think through how to integrate their life and their business and design it in the right way to serve their interests?
You said the magic word. Tom is the process man.
I am. What was funny was that this process basically came from all the work I was doing with companies. And then as we got busy with the businesses and having kids, we basically had to start using these concepts so that we could just, make sure we covered everything. And so after we used it for a while, we kind of got better with it. Other people saw it and they're like, oh, teach us that, because, we don't know how you guys get everything done. And I definitely need help getting everything done. So we actually call it Plan with Purpose. And it used to have a much better name, and then Ariana trumped me.
Oh, shush. My name's way more awesome.
So it used to be called Reverse Engineering Your Success, and I would agree. Your name is better.
Yeah, her name is much better, Tom.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I think I'm the only person that likes that name. Everyone else likes the new one, so we stuck with that. But the whole point is, a lot of people, kind of get caught on this wheel, this rat race, and they're only looking at today forward. And what we like to tell people to do is to take a step back and think about where you want to be in the future. Like we call it the vision for your life. And this could be, I mean, you could do a vision board for this. You could talk about and think about what you want your life to look like. And then we have people work backwards to basically say, okay, what are the incremental steps to get there? If you lay things out, we then also always talk about like GPS. So the beautiful thing about GPS is you got your destination of where you want to go. You've got your starting point of where you are today, and then you're going to build a plan or a map to get there. But the beautiful thing about GPS is that you're only focused on really the next thing that you're going to, like where you're driving. And then you're checking in along the way. And if you're off track, GPS is going to tell you. So what we always tell people to do is like start with the end in mind, think about what you want your life to look like, work backwards to then figure out what are the different goals that will help get you there and what are the time frames for achieving those. And then that's going to give you basically a direction. And then we do a handful of meetings to then basically check in and say, are we still on track? Do we have to adjust the destination, or do we have to adjust what we're going to do coming up to make sure that everything is supporting that life that we want?
So you're talking to a lawyer here, and I think some of the audience may not really have a sense of it either. Explain the concept of a vision board. What is a vision board?
Sure.
How do you create it? And where does that fit in, and how does that help you along the way?
So basically, a vision board is what a lot of people use for motivational purposes, things that you want out of life that you kind of collect all in one space. And for the purposes of our plan with purpose process, we like to use a vision board and break it out into 4 quadrants. In talking to people, in doing research, and kind of doing this process ourselves, you often figure out that there's these themes of things that everyone kind of strives to achieve in their life. So you've got, the first one is a lot of the times people have like material wants. Like I want a bigger house. I want a cooler car. Maybe I want a tiny house and I want to be able to travel the country with my family. So anything like materialistic or anything that's kind of in that theme, you would write that out on a vision board. Then we like to use experiences, because oftentimes as parents, as spouses, as people with a family, you have these things that you want for the people that you love. You want to be able to go on vacations. You want to be able to get your kid on and off the bus from school. You want to be able to go to those random school outings that they tell you about a week before. Like you want all of those experiences that you're envisioning for yourself, your spouse, and your family. Those would go on your vision board. The next quadrant we like to talk about is the impact that you want to make. And I know that word kind of is a buzzword nowadays and has a lot of different definitions behind it. But ultimately, this could be impact on a small scale. So directly impacting yourself, your family, the people around you. Maybe it's your community, or maybe you have a bigger vision of impacting thousands or hundreds of thousands of people in some way. Whatever way that is, you would put that in your impact section. And then the last one, we've kind of gone back and forth with this one a couple times. You can have sort of like business goals if you want to put that on your vision board. But one of the ones that we've gone back to is things you don't want. So you don't want to be working a job in 40 hours to 60 hours a week. You don't want to be spending time on things that don't light you up inside. What are those things that you don't want to be doing any longer when you reach that ideal lifestyle?
Yeah. And so once you lay that vision out and you have a clearer picture of what you want your life to look like, then what we do is we help entrepreneurs model the business that will then support that lifestyle. Because depending on the lifestyle you want, you're going to have to set your business up and even what type of business you go into differently. And this is really where the magic happens, because most people say, I want to start a business. They go pick a business, they go forward with it, and the business ends up taking over their life. Whereas when you go through this process, you say, what do I want my life to look like? What kind of business will enable that life? And then you go and start that business and set things up in the direction of where you want to go instead of your business taking over your life.
Yeah. And for those that have already started businesses, obviously, this is a point where you can choose to pivot and change direction and say, well, I started this business. How can I mold it and make it fit what I need it to be in order to reach that lifestyle?
So I have a question. How often do people, when you work with them on this, end up having to make a major pivot? And the reason I ask is kind of my story. So I was a lawyer who was doing litigation, so handling disputes. And it drove me nuts at some point. I realized I just didn't want to do it anymore because it meant I was having to travel a lot. I was away from my family. Again, I didn't mind traveling before I had my daughter, but then it bothered me. And so I kind of realized at some point I just couldn't do that anymore if I actually wanted to have the life I wanted. So I pivoted, and it's been over a year now since I started that, or well over 2 years since I started the pivot, about a year ago that I really pivoted. So I'm wondering how often that happens for folks.
Yeah, so I would say less often that people have to pivot and do like a completely separate business. Most of the time what we find if people have an established business is that they just don't have the systems and the team set up so that they're playing the role they want and they're working the amount of time they want and making the money they want. Mm-hmm. So a lot of what we end up doing is going in and basically doing like an audit. That usually starts with, the entrepreneur, the founder, and kind of looking at their time and then looking at what their goals are and then how what they're doing today is either supporting that or taking away from it. And then what we help them do is basically say, well, this is what that business would have to look like to enable what you're talking about. And then what are the different pieces or changes that we've got to put in place, either hiring people, putting better systems in place, maybe even changing the business model a little bit to ultimately get there.
Yeah, and some of the examples I think on business model is you have to decide, for example, how much you want to be, I don't want to say on call, but dealing one-on-one with people versus, for example, having something that's more automated where you're more course-based or program-based. How do those kinds of choices tend to affect the lifestyle that an entrepreneur can have?
It's really tough because a lot of people, of course, you hear everyone in the online space talk about passive income, and that sounds amazing. But the passive part usually comes after you've put in all the work up front. And a lot of people don't see that because, of course, no one wants to tell you that part. So, they get into it thinking like, I'm going to create courses and I'm going to be a blogger and I'm going to just make all this money without having to do a lot of work up front or without having to talk to a lot of people. And I could just kind of, be behind my computer. And what that tends to cause is a real disconnect between the lifestyle that they're trying to achieve and the actual amount of revenue that their business ends up making. So a lot of times we do have to have that kind of like hard truths conversation when they sit down and say, well, I want this lifestyle. And, I've looked it over. We have some parts of the program in our Find Your Freedom blog. We talk about finding your freedom number. So what does it mean if you wanted to leave your job? How much would you have to make for, to replace your income in your business? And, everyone's like, oh, yeah, I only need to make this much a month. But then when they look at their business model, they realize that it's not counting up to that. It's not leading up to that. So I think that is one of the ways where it's really tough to automatically choose a business model if you don't kind of look at how much work it takes up front and how long it takes too. I think a lot of people don't see the timeline of, okay, well, this is the business I'm going to start. And I think it's going to take me 3 months, where oftentimes it'll take people 6, 9, 12 months to really build that up to the point they need it to be.
Yeah. I love you giving that answer because I feel like there are a lot of consultants out there and people working with entrepreneurs who just aren't honest with them, quite honestly, who give them a sense that you're going to be able to make it big right away. Mm-hmm. And I know people encourage me to create courses and do all these things. And my first course I ever created was a complete flop.
Yeah, so was ours.
Yeah, most are, to be honest.
The content wasn't bad, but I didn't have my messaging right. I didn't have all right. And so I spent something like $10,000 on Facebook ads to ultimately get 40 people to show up to a webinar and nobody bought. And I was like, what just happened? And so I think a lot of people have this mistaken belief that it's rainbows and butterflies. And it's good to hear that you guys are out there telling more, but I do want to ask, what are the biggest blocks that you find entrepreneurs run into that stop them from getting this done or kind of getting the life that they want?
That is a good question.
Yeah, there's a couple of them. I think one, it comes down to their mentality around things. And just like you just talked about, oftentimes there's people that will tell you how easy it is. And, a lot of times people will dive into that. Like it's funny. People will come to us and we'll tell them the reality. And then they'll be like, well, I can just go buy this $2,000 course and then it's going to solve all my problems. Time and time again, those people will then come back to us later and be like, Tom and Ariana, I spent all this money on these courses. I've done all this stuff. I've spent 2 years. I've done everything they've said, but I'm not making any money. And oftentimes what that comes back to is their mindset around what it means to be an entrepreneur and thinking that they can kind of shortcut it. Yeah. But what we really help people to do is to say, you know what, the number one thing you got to do is figure out your business model and really get clear on your customers. And what most people won't do, they're not willing to do the hard work at the beginning because they're just chasing passive income, not trying to build a business. But when we get people to say, who is it that you really want to work with? Who do you want to serve? And go out and have 50 conversations with those people, not like post up on a Facebook group, but like go and, meet them for coffee, get them on a Zoom call. It's the people that do that they're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe how much clarity I have. I now know what the offer is. And then when they go and launch a course or launch an offering after that, they get people to buy, one, because they truly understand their customer, but two, those 50 or 100 people they talk to, if they've nailed the solution and it's the right customer, a good portion of those people are now going to buy.
Listening to you tell that or give that advice is just so fantastic because it mimics my life. My first failure was just that. I thought I knew what my potential customer wanted. And it was only when I did the hard work of actually talking to my ICA that things started to change. So I love that you're giving that advice. I think that is probably the biggest block that I had. And I think it probably is true for a lot of people. But let me go down there a little bit. How can someone find those people? I mean, what's the advice you give them on how to find the people and get them to actually talk with them?
It's kind of funny because one of the complaints we get when we say this is they're like, well, how am I going to find those people? And my question back is, if you create the product, how are you going to find them then? And most people then at that point go, oh yeah, that's a good point. So what we do is we take people through a process. If people want to go and look, there's a 1-page business plan that we use called a lean canvas. And basically, like most people want to avoid business plans because they don't want to create like a 50-page document and do all this research. But what this does is it basically says the key elements of your business model, we're going to put on 1 page and you're going to fill it out in like an hour, basically with your assumptions. And one of those things basically describes who is your customer, what are their problems, and then what are the marketing channels that you're going to use to reach them. So when you lay this out, you're then going to say, okay, let me go and test those marketing channels and let me go and see if I can find people with this problem. Because guess what? If you can't, then it doesn't matter how good your solution is, you're not going to be able to ever sell that. So you're going to test. And once you can find, like, let's say you think your people are in a Facebook group, which there's millions of Facebook groups. I'm sure they are. So you want to go into those Facebook groups and then see if you can start identifying those people and seeing if you can just have a conversation with them. So this isn't to sell them anything, but just to learn more about them and some of their problems. So it really comes down to getting clear on who it is you want to work with, having an assumption about where you think you can find them. It might be online, it might be offline, and then going out and testing that.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people forget about that whole offline aspect, how many local meetups there are with entrepreneurs. If your target clients aren't entrepreneurs, you can often find, like, a lot of people are, marketing to moms. Well, moms meet a lot of places. So if you can look in the offline space and find, mom meetups or playdate meetups or go to the park, like, just find other people meeting and ask them if you can ask some questions, take them out for coffee and just do it that way, old fashioned, get people on the phone or take people out for coffee and ask them those questions.
I think that's definitely true, but I want to talk about what he talked about there. When he talked about going to a Facebook group, I think the trick, though, when you're going to do that is you can't do these flybys. Like, I see those all the time where somebody goes into somebody else's Facebook group and just posts like a question. Oh, what's your biggest concern about this? Well, even if I'm potentially your ICA, I'm not going to talk to you because why in the world? Why do I want to help you? But it's in developing the relationships, I think, and actually being social that you can get some true value out of that. So.
Yeah, and that's a great point. And that's where I think when coming back to the mentality thing, a lot of people are like, well, I just want to make money or I just want to build passive income. The mentality that you got to have going into this is that I want to serve people. I want to help them. And if you go in with that mentality, you're going to be more focused on relationships and you're going to be more focused on really understanding and helping somebody solve a problem. And when you go in that way, you're willing to put in the work. And I mean, if you're going to go into a Facebook group, maybe connect with the admin and say, here's what I'm looking to do. Here's how this can help you. I mean, like, so for example, myself and another very experienced entrepreneur, we're doing like these just free breakthrough calls in this one group. and we're just jumping on with anyone in the group that needs help, and we're helping them out. That gives us a ton of research on what these people in this group are facing challenges with that we could then go and create a solution later on with. So there's a million ways to do this, but most people aren't really thinking about, what can I do to really help people? And guess what? If you help people and you pay it forward, it's going to come back to you tenfold.
I love that. My word of the year for this year is giving. And for the listeners who don't know, I first met Ariana through a Facebook group we're in for a program we're going through. And I think she'll say I've been very giving in that group.
I'm going to say the most giving.
But I did it honestly and purely just to give, not wanting anything back, not expecting anything back. And the funny thing is, when I finally made that shift this year, that's when all of a sudden it all started coming back, because people could honestly see that I cared and was just trying to be there and be helpful.
Yep.
And so I think for listeners, you can't think of it transactionally. And I think that's what Tom was saying. You just have to go in there and just want to serve these people. And so I think that probably leads to a good tip. And let me ask you guys about this. I think another part of being successful is make sure that you're serving people and that your customers are people you actually want to spend time with.
Yes.
Is that kind of one of the keys?
Huge key. Huge key. That was honestly, some people that have been seeing us out on the internet may find this. We used to be under a different brand name. We used to be Serial Startups. We had the podcast, Serial Startups Podcast. And that became apparent to me at one point. I was feeling very disconnected. And that's when we made the shift over into the family space. And we created the Lifestyle Builders program, and we changed up all of our messaging, and we really, really honed in on who it was that we wanted to work with. And once that light bulb went off over my head, immediately I was 100% both feet in, get back to the business. I want to be involved. Whereas before I was really struggling to kind of be aligned with what we were doing and to be fully present.
And I think the point is that as an entrepreneur, you are at first, you're going to be the head cook and chief bottle washer. So you're going to have to do everything. You're going to have to put in those 80-hour weeks. So you better have a really strong reason for your why. And I think for most people, that's going to have to be the people you work with and wanting to really make their lives better. So I think, and I think you'll agree with me on this, the key is you have to want to serve them not because you think you're going to make money, but because you're happy to be serving those people. Is that something you found as well?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, a lot of advice just keeps getting passed around. And one of them is when people want to start a business, they're like, oh, well, find your passion. And, passion is a piece of it, but it's only a piece. And oftentimes what we find is people put their passion in like a product or an idea, where we tell people, put the passion in people. And that could be like the people in your life that are important, and you're building this business for them. It's also your customers. Like really, really care about serving them. And that's another thing too. If you're focusing on your product, you're going to forget about your customers and not listen to them. But if you focused on serving your customers, your product or your business may morph over time as the needs of your customers change. So everything starts and ends with people.
I think that's probably the quotable we should almost stop with. Everything begins and ends with people. I don't think you could say it much better than that. But I do want to ask you quickly about systems. Are there systems that you set up, either manual or electronic, that you find are helpful along the way?
Of course. We actually we took it back to as simple as it could go. And we used to do all of our goal planning, our vision boarding, our weekly tasks breakdown used to all be actual pieces of paper. We used to have painter's tape up on the wall, Post-it notes. And that's how we would do our quarterly planning, our annual planning. And that's how we would kind of go back and forth during the week with each other. And I want to say just last year we moved everything digital, or was it?
Well, but so even though we move things digital, we still do our planning with pen and paper.
Yep.
And what happens to a lot of people is they try to become efficient, or they try to optimize things before they need to. And what we tell people to do is first focus on being effective. So whenever you're doing something, you first want to basically do it manual. And like the kind of the framework we always tell people, it starts with people first, then the strategy, then the process you're going to use to achieve that strategy. And then at the end, it's the technology that will help you make it more efficient. So what a lot of people do is they jump right into the tools, and then they try to figure out how to use them and how to put a process together. We always tell people, let's figure out the process that's going to, help make everything work. And then once we have that going, then we'll use tools and technology to make it more efficient and to get some of your time back.
Yeah. And we've actually kind of went back to the basics. We used to have a tool that we used and decided it was no longer serving us. So we're back using a free and simple tool, and that's Trello.
It's funny that you said that, because I can remember many times where I bought into the notion, though, if I buy that tool, it's going to make my life so much better. And tools can be nice, but they're not going to solve your problem. Until you have a good business, it's just not going to help. So you still plan on pen and paper, which I love. And then basically from there, you put it in your electronic systems.
Whoa, Tom's attacking his mic over there. Yes, we do our weekly, after we've broken everything down. Obviously, we have the big overview process where we do annual planning. And then every quarter we meet and break that down into 90-day sprints. And then we break everything down week by week, and we meet with each other. So we have a joint Trello board because obviously we are working together. That gives us the ability to quickly and efficiently go through our weeks, figure out who's doing what, and make sure that all of this stuff's getting done.
Do you have a planner that you use, or have you made it up yourself?
Basically, we make it up ourselves. And actually, it's funny. Recently, I've actually gone back to using a paper planner, and we're kind of designing our own that I think we'll probably share out with people because a lot of people are asking. I actually start everything with paper now, and then we'll put it in the tool to help track it. Yeah, I mean, that's one of the biggest takeaways I recommend to people is don't overcomplicate things. Use the simplest thing you can, and then you can always add stuff on later.
Yep.
Yeah, I use a paper planner. I use Michael Hyatt's Full Focus Planner, which I love.
Nice.
Although I wish it had more of kind of the 90-day planning built in and some of those. And that's been my problem. I find one that I love for one thing, and so I've often wondered about doing it myself. But I wish there was a place I could go just see them all.
Well, that's what we always tell people because, I mean, every planner is good for the aspect and the process. But most of the times, each of our processes is a little bit different. And so that's what we always tell people. We're like, figure out your process and then go and find a tool or a planner that works for that. And if you can't, then you might, create your own or do an integration or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's great advice. Now, I don't want to keep you too much longer, but I do have one question I always like to ask my guests because I like to think in actionable steps.
Mm-hmm.
So what is a piece of advice that you would give to the listeners that they could do either by the end of the week or in 5 minutes a day to improve their business? And in this case, in building yourself, building the lifestyle they want along with their business.
That is a good question. You want me to go first or you want to go first?
Well, I was going to either answer after you, but I can go first. So for the immediate thing, one of the first things we do with everybody we work with is we have them do a time audit. And essentially what that's doing is tracking every half hour of your day for a week. And then at the end of the week, what you can do is go back and really look at where your time's being spent. And then the other piece of this is, really laying out your vision and your goals. And then what you want to do is say, is where I'm spending my time in alignment with the goals and vision that I want to get to? Because more often than not, people think they're being very productive. But when we go and ask that question, what they find is they're not.
I'm actually going to go along a similar route with a different kind of audit. Another tool that we often have people, well, not a tool, but another process we often have people go through is a tool and programs audit. So there are a lot of us out there that, as we're starting our business, we're kind of jumping on this tool. We've got this tool over here. These are free tools. These are paid tools. And we get to a point where we don't actually know all of the tools that we have available or that we're using. So doing the tool and courses or programs audit, you basically just write out an entire list of any tool that you use for anything, whether that's a social media scheduler, a project management tool like Trello, even if it's a paper journal, anything like that, write it all down and go down the list and write which ones are paid, which ones are free, if you're using them or not using them. And if you have courses or programs that you have access to, kind of listing that all out and saying, okay, well, I have all of these things available and they have certain types of knowledge that I may or may not need. So that just gives you kind of a big picture of what you're working with.
To the listeners, let me give you a piece of warning. It's a great thing to do, but be careful because you may scare yourself. I did it like 2 months ago and realized I had 2 email service providers, 3 online scheduling systems.
Yep.
Like, I think 8 different social media schedulers. And I said, this is ridiculous. Well, it was good. I've simplified now. I'm down. By the end of the summer, I plan to be down to like 2 or 3 online tools I'm using. So
yeah, well, it does save you money too, because you find a couple that you're not even using and you've been paying for, and you're like, what the heck? Why am I paying for these things?
Yeah, I mean, we've had some people we've worked with where we do all these audits, obviously, and we've sometimes had them save like $1,000 a month in their budget, which basically means that they just have an extra $12,000 a year just by cutting back on these things. So they don't have to go get no new clients. They just have to cut out on the stuff they're not using.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's what I found. I don't think I'm at $1,000, but I'm going to save about $500 a year or a month by getting off of all these tools.
Yeah, that's huge.
Yeah.
Well, guys, it has been great. I think my listeners are probably going to want to reach out and find out some more information from you. Where can they do that? What's the best way for them to get in touch with you if they want to kind of learn what you can do to help them?
Of course, we are going to create a special page just for you and your listeners, and that will be at tomandariana.com/YOG.
So we talked about like Plan with Purpose, which is basically a free video course that walks through step by step this entire process.
Yep.
So we've got that there. We talked about Find Your Freedom, which is the process that we find a lot of people, they don't go through and kind of map out, how do I leave my job or how do I achieve financial freedom? So we'll post up some of those links there as well, just so people can really deep dive in that.
I appreciate that. And listeners, I think you really ought to go there because this seems like some really great stuff. I took a look at some of Tom and Ariana's content and it is great. So definitely take a look. I'm sure you're going to find some really useful information. But I want to thank you guys for being on again. I think this has been fantastic.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah,
it was an honor to be on the show.
That is it for now. Listeners, stick around for the legal lesson, but in honor of this show, I'm going to make it a really quick one.
And now for today's legal lesson.
Yay! I love those two. That was probably one of the most fun interviews I've gotten to have in this podcast, which was fantastic. You know, I love their advice on kind of having a plan and structuring your life and doing all of those things so you are in a good place and aligned with your business. And as I said, I'm going to give you a quick lesson on this one because, quite honestly, I got a lot going on in my life and I need to have a bit of balance. So what I want to talk about is my ongoing obsession, you might say, with the GDPR. You've heard me talk about it a lot. This is a podcast that's coming out right before the deadline for the GDPR to go into effect. And so I wanted to go ahead and address something. And that is, how do you systematize and organize things so that you can make sure you're complying with the GDPR, but also other legal requirements, and quite honestly, also to make your business run better from a digital standpoint. And what I'm talking about is creating what's called a data map. Now, a data map is not something that's strictly legal or that's a legal requirement anywhere. You don't have to create it and post it or file it or do anything like that for it. But what it is just what it sounds like. It's a map of the data in your business. And why it's important is we as online entrepreneurs are collecting data, collecting information all over the place. And if you're like a lot of entrepreneurs, after you collect that data, it ends up going a bunch of different places. I don't know about you, but I've got Zaps, I've got webhooks, I've got all of these different things. Now, I'm simplifying. I'm going down to Kartra as my primary service provider and just about the only place I'm going to be hosting data other than my WordPress sites pretty soon. But in the past, I've had a Franken system where I patched together a bunch of different systems. And quite honestly, I don't even remember everywhere where data is coming into my business. And that's a problem. And it's a problem because, just generally, we should know where things are in our business. But under the GDPR, it's something you definitely need to know. Because if someone comes to you from the European Union and wants you to delete their data, you've got to know where that data is. And just so you know, under the GDPR, they have that right to come and say, I want you to delete my data from your storage systems. Now, is it going to happen? I have no idea, but it definitely might. And so if you want to make sure that it's not a problem and that you're able to actually comply with your requirements, when someone comes to you and says, I want you to delete my data, you need to know where it is. And the only way you're going to know that is your data map. So let's talk about how you go about creating a data map. It doesn't have to be complicated. There's not some complicated template or anything special to it. All you need to do is identify, here are all of the different places and all of the different tools where I'm collecting data from people. So obvious places to think about. Any lead magnets, any opt-in pages, any sales funnels, all of that, you're collecting data. But also think about your website. Do you have forms on your website? Then you're collecting data there. Do you have other things on your website that are tagging people and putting some information and actually collecting data for you? If so, you need to put that down. So you need to list all of the different places, first of all, that you're collecting data. And when I say place here, I'm really thinking it's often going to be a piece of software, a plugin, something like that. But you're going to want all of that listed. And then next to each one, say, okay, what data do I collect? And this could be name, email address, phone number, credit card, whatever the information is you collect. Then you need to put next to it, say, hey, do I get consent? What's my basis? How am I able to collect this? And normally it will be consent or something else, but you need to understand that and write it down. And then next to it, you need to say, okay, what happens to this data after it comes in? So let me give you a common implementation that you might have. Well, maybe you have lead pages to collect data, but then you have, let's just say, MailChimp as your email service provider. Okay, so you collect the data at lead pages, then it gets transferred to MailChimp. So you need to just track that through. But let me give you a more complicated method. Maybe you're using a messenger chatbot like ManyChat to collect data, including email addresses that then get put into a funnel of a webinar. Well, you need to know, hey, this data is in ManyChat, but I'm also pulling it out of ManyChat and putting it over here. So you need to think about all the integrations, but then also anywhere where there's a Zap through Zapier, a webhook, an API, anything like that where you are transferring data, you need to understand that process. And by understand, let me be clear. You don't need to understand the technical piece. I don't understand the technical pieces. But I do need to understand, here's a place I collect data, and once I collect it, here's where it goes. So that's what you're going to do so that you then have a track where you say, okay, if someone comes to you and says, hey, you collected my email here, I want you to delete my data. You can just go through your data map and say, okay, it went here, 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 and there, and boom, I got to delete it all those places. So that's the task for today. That's my lesson, is go ahead and create a data map and think of it like Tom and Ariana were talking about, creating a system and really kind of systematizing your business. I got to tell you, when you do this, one of the things you may find is you have a lot of overlap and you can actually get rid of some of the programs. I did this process and it was essentially creating a digital audit, and I realized I was wasting a lot of money because I had duplicative systems and all that. Luckily, I found Kartra afterwards and I've since replaced all of it. But even if I hadn't, I would have realized I could have eliminated a bunch of different programs I was paying for because they were duplicative. So create that data map. It'll have that benefit plus the legal benefits. That's it for this show. Next week, I have something very special planned for you, so I hope you'll tune in. Until next time, this is Bobby Klink saying I will talk to you next week.
Thanks for listening. And remember to visit mistakes.youronlinegenius.com to get your essential guide to the 4 legal mistakes that can doom your business and how to avoid them. Join us next week for another episode to expand your online genius and your success.